when are we going to have fun again, she says. And I don't know. Now, not just because it's now snowy Canadian October, but I'm thinking about horror movies. And this was actually inspired by somebody was asking me about Genesis. And I thought about that idea of breathing life into clay, creating man, and what exactly that's supposed to be an allegory of. How did they get the idea? And I think, well, I mean, when you're creating life, I guess you're panting pretty hard. That seems to be the association. And then I started to think, well, what else have we got? We've got the Golem of Prague, which is a being that I believe a rabbi made out of clay, and then he fed instructions into the golem, and he was supposed to do his bidding, and the golem turned on him. And I think, well, that's probably an analysis of rhetoric. That's some subconscious fear of words being used, first against your enemies and then against you. And then I think about Frankenstein. Now, what is Frankenstein? Animated by electricity. Around the time that Shelley had written it, this is when the world was becoming electrified. And I think, all right, so it's about finding a bunch of pieces of people in a graveyard and then animating it with electricity. And so bringing back the dead and the undead, it seems to be about electricity and modern technology and everything, supporting the life of people that perhaps wouldn't otherwise survive. But it also causes society and people to become more connected across larger spaces. Hence this sort of idea of stitching together a monster out of all these different vernaculars and cultures, bound by the telephone or the telegraph lines at the time. And horror usually is a tap into the collective unconscious. So we'll think about, Dracula, the whole idea of, this European fear, I suppose, of a mysterious foreigner coming, and it may be a reference to serial killers, it'd be a reference to war itself, but it's just this very ancestral suspicion of foreigners. And then what I'm thinking about, well, I overheard somebody at a party talking about Hitchcock's The Birds, and how it was kind of stupid and kind of a one-off that it was a horror film about birds. Now, when we talk about fears and I suppose nightmares of the collective unconscious, well, if you're in an agrarian society, birds are actually quite dangerous. The reason that you have scarecrows is because you plant a bunch of seeds, and then the birds come and peck them out of the ground and eat them, and whoops, you're dead. So there is a very deep ancestral fear of birds, as hokey as that sounds. I know that they were made to directly attack people, but it's very difficult to represent agricultural existential crises. I suppose Grapes of Wrath would be the closest to get, but that's not really a thriller, so to speak. Now, I'm thinking about Michael Crichton. Most people know him because of Jurassic Park. And I'll say right now, I don't really like Jurassic Park. I actually hate dinosaurs in general. I've never loved dinosaurs. When you're a kid, they really push dinosaurs on you. It's just like heckin' science, and I hate it. They're just giant, dumb lizards. Give me megafauna, give me an elephant, give me something. But it's just, I don't care. I've never thought about T-Rex. It's just Brontosaurus, I don't care. I just don't care. They're dead, they're gone, and mammals have... this little shrew-sized mammal, the ancestor of every mammal that survived that event, a little rat is what populated the earth. Mammals are superior, that's it. Now, Jurassic Park itself, so Michael Crichton is a really interesting author because he used to be a physician. And when you read his books, especially for anything that is describing medical or scientific procedures, it is incredibly detailed and excruciatingly fact-checked. I know that in Jurassic Park, the science is quite solid. And I think that he was aware of genetic manipulation. And we're thinking CRISPR, and we're thinking about germ warfare. Just once you discover a technology, it can obviously be used for nefarious things. And so he substantiated our fears of genetic modification into literal monsters, which is beautiful. And it's he always turns things into a very proper arc. He's another one of those authors that is very well adapted to the screen because that's just the way that he writes the skeletons of these things. And my favorite of his is the Andromeda strain. Now, this is a really interesting one because, spoilers, but who cares? This is from the 60s. So it's a virus that they find in the stratosphere. And so it combines the fear of the space race and the militarization of space, and as well as a lot of the new diseases that are coming about in the 60s as the world becomes more interconnected. They eradicated or were close to eradicating polio at that point, but there was always these fears of like, what's the next thing? And there's all these new vectors, and a lot of viruses are a lot harder to handle than polio. So they collect a virus from, I don't know if it was a virus, some kind of pathogen, but from the upper atmosphere. And what it does initially is that it clots people and animals' blood immediately. You inhale the pathogen, and your entire bloodstream just essentially turns to sand immediately. Now, this is kind of interesting because, seed oils and hydrogenated seed oils, it was very hard to actually find arterial sclerosis in the population, like blood clots and sort of plaques in the arteries that led to myocardial infarction. It was very rare to find that before they started releasing seed oils and hydrogenated oils. So the idea being that it's an inflammatory agent, that's what actually causes the platelets to aggregate and cholesterol to be raised, to fix the damage in arteries that have been chronically inflamed. But the idea is they try to blame it on saturated fat. I mean, this is very old news to anybody listening to this. But it's very interesting how, getting this bug from the stratosphere leads to instant blood clotting, which, for a population around 1960 that had only been sitting with people having heart attacks and these widowmakers at 30 for not that long, right? And so it's like the subconscious fear of the government, which is, that is the genesis of a lot of these food recommendations. So very famously in the States, because they didn't want to have to rely on tropical oils and they didn't want to have to rely on animal oils because those are actually relatively expensive, the sort of enshittification of the food supply led to them relying on seed oils, cottonseed, which is actually where the name Crisco comes from. It's crystallized cottonseed oil. Cottonseed oil is very, very high in omega-6. It's also very dirty in terms of the inflammatory chemicals in it, and also processing aids. But the same is true for soybean and canola. And actually in Atlas Shrugged, there was this whole long thing about soybeans in it, which I found, quite prescient. So anyway, the point is that government policy leads to people's blood clotting. And in this, it was a dramatized instant death, and it was a very crazy and shocking thing. Now, the book and the movie are incredibly intelligent. Everybody in there is this beautiful, well-reasoned scientist, and all of the conflicts that people have are very high-minded and very compelling and very interesting. I mean, it's almost like it's 12 Angry Men along with the pandemic film. Now, it is actually, to me, kind of a reverse horror film because the response of the scientists in this movie are so much better than anything that we could expect now. If anything, it's more of an elegiac for the way that science used to be. These high-minded, intelligent people, there was no inclusion of big pharma in the mix. I know that the military was shown in quite a positive light, but just the utter competence just reminds me of what we're dealing with now. He's got another one. So Airframe was a really interesting book. I mean, it's, again, spoilers, but it's there's this massive investigation into an airplane going down. In the end, it turns out to just be human error. And that in and of itself is something of a terror. So no matter how wonderful the technology is. Well, it's human error and a combination of institutional decline in terms of regulation and design and government inclusion in the unions. But the point is that like it is this thing about how we've got very tight technologies and things that have a lot of moving pieces. Like they go on this long thing with the supply chain and the traceability of like every single part in an aircraft and like just the massive web of interactions and failure points in this whole thing. And so it's sort of like a man that emerges in a technological society. It's just this fear that it's going to break down because of the human element, and it's going to break down because of institutional rot, so to speak. So it's a horror movie in and of itself for the technological era. And then Sphere is one that, the Sphere, I think. I hated it at first. But it's actually a lot deeper than I thought, literally. So it's a thing about ancient alien spacecraft, bottom of the ocean, and there's a lot of talk about the breathing environment that they're in. The idea being it's some like weird exotic gas mixture, including a bunch of helium, and they're very low at the bottom of the sea, and it's sort of fish out of water or fish in water, because it's a bunch of these like Poindexter scientists that are suddenly in this incredibly exotic environment messing with an alien spacecraft. Now, it's an allegory in the sense that like the bottom of the ocean is sort of the next frontier for mankind. It's actually easier to go into space than it is the bottom of the ocean, believe it or not. You would rather be in the Mariana Trench, or you'd rather be on the moon than the Mariana Trench. It's actually a lot easier to deal with space. But anyway, so it's this idea about man approaching a new epoch. And then the big baddie in the movie is actually like this alien, I don't even know what you'd call it. It's like a sphere that allows people to come into it. And what happens is that if a person steps into the sphere, and the process is actually made very mysterious, steps into the sphere and everything in the person's subconscious manifests itself in reality. And that actually seems to be a reference to, we talk about in terms of societal advancements that one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of cultures and races as advanced as us is because there seems to be like some great filter, that they think that everybody nukes each other or something like that. Like there's something that all of the potentially spacefaring and translite races and worlds they annihilate themselves at that point. And thus we never see them. And it seems to be referring to that limit in the sense that if the collective unconscious, much like the unconscious of the people that step in the sphere, it manifests like monsters and stuff that attack the ship and like kill the crew and all this. And they're initially fighting it as though it was the alien entity itself when it's actually the subconscious. And like it's like a jealous and unstable enemy because it's based on a human subconscious, and they only kind of piece together through inductive. No, there's a special there's a special type of logic that what doesn't matter, but they finally figure out that it's actually the subconscious of the other people that step in the sphere. And what the allegory seems to be is that this is the thing that's stopping us from achieving something. It's these human fallibilities. It's these pains and traumas and these jealousies and these, because it's sold a lot at the beginning of the book how all the scientists are kind of at odds with one another, and they've got their own jealousies and their own insecurities, and that gets amplified by this sphere, so to speak. It's a bad book, but it's very sophisticated. I really quite like it. And actually, I got back into Crichton because somebody had said that the book Disclosure was actually incredibly, quote, based and, quote, red-pilled, and the fact that it would never be able to be published today, and that's sort of candy to me. And it's essentially just a sexual harassment story, but it's the woman, that's doing the sexual harassment, which, I mean, in his books, and I think a lot of times when you have a strong female character, there's nothing written that's particularly feminine about them. It's just a man that's been gender swapped. Like there's no behavioral cues, because writing women is a lot different from writing men. I wouldn't say that it's more complicated or less complicated, but it's just, or heck, I don't even have to go into it. We know men and women are different, and you can't just put a skirt on your male character and expect it to be anything indicative of a female character whatsoever. And in fact, the way that he treats family in the books is sort of like they're introduced as kind of like an annoying thing. So in Airframe, it's this Goral boss that is like an aviation safety expert. And it's just at the beginning of the book, like, she's a single mom, and like, it's just like, Mom, pack my lunch. But no, I got to like save the world. And then you have the whole bloody book. And then at the very end of it, that is sort of your payoff, is that she can spend time with her daughter. Like, okay, I mean, the book is very interesting, but there's nothing inherently strong. There's no real strong feminine in there. And then this is kind of an odd one, but the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now this is even deeper, I think, because what it is fear of being gay and fear of gay people in general, and sort of the fear of your own sexuality. That is the whole point of the movie. Banging soundtrack too. Touch it, touch it, touch it, touch me. I want to feel dirty. I mean, that's beautiful. And so what you got in there is just like the main villain, so to speak, is a transvestite. And like this young, naive married couple shows up, and then this Tim Curry, I think. I forget the name of the character. I only remember the soundtrack, obviously. Seduces the man, and but the whole point is that it's obviously like a very subconscious fear. And if you think about it, like, musical theater written in the 60s and 70s, it was still illegal back then. You can understand how this is actually a very dangerous thing for a lot of fellas back then, and women too, because, the fear of the fellow you love actually being gay is quite a frightening prospect. I mean, I've told the most sort of progressive people sort of stories about people I've known that have had, children, and then they come out of the closet when the kids have left the house, and they're just like, oh, that poor woman. And this is fairly universal across the political spectrum. And what I find very interesting about sort of the trans thing is that there's a lot of different issues. Like, it's a big tent. But I do think that for both straight and gay alike, there is sort of this fear of annihilation, so to speak. So it's really coarse and stupid to say that people just date their parents, but there is this idea that, and it's fairly well documented, I think, and everyone sort of knows it intuitively, is that when you're a child, your parent of the opposite sex does basically provide you a blueprint for what you think the opposite sex is, like deeply within your soul. And then I think, well, my mom was very mechanically inclined. In fact, she was an aircraft mechanic for a time. And when people talk about the ick, like seeing like their fella like in like ankle socks or something, to see the first time that I saw, like, okay, one experience is just when a lot of women would greet each other. Like, my mother is quite intelligent and reserved and European. And when I would work around a lot of women, and when they would greet each other, they would scream at each other when they met each other. Like, they would just, they had this competition to see who could be like the most loud and evocative when they greeted each other. And it was, I'm trying, like, I'm in an office and I'm trying to do something. I was like, oh my God, how are you? And it's like, shut the fuck up. Like, it's really, really jarring and tense. It wasn't just a mild annoyance. The other thing is, like, watching a real girly girl use like a screwdriver or a wrench or any hand tool, and like being so awkward with it. Like, is this the first time that you've used your hands, let alone a screwdriver? But anyway, I think there's this very odd thing about gender identity. Like, gender is a spectrum. Well, I tend to think that sex is a binary. But within that binary, I think that femininity is a spectrum and masculinity is a spectrum. So when I think about women, if they are, say, really stoic, mechanically inclined, very good at very like non-neurotic or not very agreeable. You know, it's just this collection of things that would be considered masculine traits. They don't consider them women that just happen to have more of a masculine bent to it. Sort of like the tomboy phenomenon, or it manifests in a lot of different ways. The fear is that, actually, you know what? You're not a woman that just happens to have certain masculine proclivities. You're actually a man as such. And that needs to be corrected. So it's this very interesting thing and dangerous thing where we're annihilating a whole host of women, and we're annihilating a whole host of men. I mean, even with me, it's just like I've been asked if I'm gay a few times. Now, to be fair, this was at a time when I worked with a lot of women, so was in the natural health world for a long time. And, you know, I began to actually prefer the company of women sometimes, you know, because boys only talk about themselves. But it was natural for me, and I got along with them. Everyone sort of assumes, because I'm kind of I have something of a flat affect. I'm always sort of deep in thought, and they just assume that I'm not in touch with my emotions whatsoever. But it's quite the opposite. I'm very familiar with my own emotions, and I'm extremely familiar with yours. But again, that's not necessarily any particular, like it's still within a spectrum. It doesn't make any sense to me. And you know, some of that was, I guess, some of that was explained away. And I mean, even the mere mention of horoscopes. But because I was born on July 23rd, so the Cancer Leo cusp, the two most opposing signs in the entire zodiac. When I tell people that, like, well, actually, when I tell girls that, they're always like, "Oh my God, really? Like, I must know." And it's apparently a really big deal. And I remember my grandmother had a book about the zodiac and horoscopes and everything, and in there it said romantic simpatico, et cetera, and it was something to the effect of like, it can only be the other Leo Cancer cusps because they're the only ones that can understand this starbound schizophrenia, where you're two completely opposite signs. Which, you know, it kind of tracks. Like, the greatest compliments I ever get are people that just think that I'm they have no idea what to think of me. Sometimes it's really antagonistic, but then they turn around. I'm a deeply silly guy, I'll say that much. But anyway, so, you know, maybe not so much with me, but then I think, I mean, you know, the handful of gay friends that I've had. I mean, so actually one was an older fella, and actually the same one that had kids and then came out of the closet. And he told me, like, even because he was a boomer, or still is a boomer, and he told me that, when you get the bottom surgery, like, he's known a few people that just killed themselves over it, just like that. Like, they went to Thailand, which was the only place to go back in the day. And, you know, just a whole lot of stories, like surviving like bathhouse raids, and then having to, because, you know, they do, like, I mean, we don't want to forget that this country used to be quite mean to homosexuals. People would get their jaws broken in bathhouse raids. Like, they would just beat the shit out of them. And I think the practice was still illegal, that is sodomy, until like 1982. So that is not that long ago when it was still illegal in the country. And, you know, the other thing too is that, like, in considering myself an ally, it's because, well, I don't know what the fuck it is where, like, banks, all that they seem to compete about is like how gay they are. Like, my bank wants to be gayer than the other bank. And, like, guys, I want a free iPad. I don't care if you're gay. I don't know why it is important for a bank to be gay. I think that, you know, money it doesn't matter what you're spending it on. It doesn't fucking matter. Anyway, but so I actually, speaking to a lot of these folks about their childhoods and their lives, without going into a lot of detail, I know a lot of the sort of dark cloud behind those rainbows, so to speak. And so when you have a more sort of fleshed out, holistic impression of what's going on, so I know that some of them are actually, like, gay men are concerned, and they express private concerns about how insane the trans phenomenon has become. And I think some of that too is just like, much in the same way that the sort of masculine women are going away, like some population, or maybe even just like lesbians that sort of get convinced and sort of pressured into this. Like you start off like, say that there's mental illness or there's autism or there's some kind of discord. Instead of treating a traditional mental illness or any kind of therapy, it's just, no, the standard procedure is now just gender affirmation. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. I mean, it's because I remember I spoke to a mother and I asked her what her experience was. And I was like, okay, so, your experience of having a child when you were like 30 something, was it like you had pictured it when you were, 8 years old or a teenager? Like what changed, what happened? And she was actually quite candid with me. And she just said, well, no, I mean, like when I was 16, I thought I'd be dead. So if you can imagine like what makes a teenager legitimately wish that she were dead and that she has no future, somebody suggests, well, maybe it's because you've got gender dysphoria. And then that leads to sterilization, yet this woman who would absolutely have a child that she loves more than anything in the world gets convinced of this decision and thus becomes infertile, and thus you have done irreparable harm. I mean, this whole idea of like women's biological clock going in overdrive, late 20s, early 30s, it's an incredibly well-known phenomenon. When you're asking it depends how young you go, like, 5, 8, 10, 15, whatever. If you ask anybody that age, do you identify as this gender based on your future ideas about having children? Well, that's malpractice, and that's completely against every developmental milestone and wisdom that we have. Now, when it comes to the surgical aspect of it, so the main idea of feeling that it's too far, too much is like one of the reasons that I guess we'll just say ally. I don't really think about this too much, but it's just the idea that like, okay, so gay and lesbian people and this collection of third gender has existed as long as humanity has, as long as the written record has. Like Lenny Bruce had lesbian mothers. Homosexuals have existed forever. It existed and it was tolerated. Like people used to, like women used to believe that Liberace was straight as an arrow, or at least they would claim that he was. And it's just this layer of plausible deniability where we're just like, it exists as long as we don't flaunt it. That seems to be somewhat stabilizing for society. So there's always been a place. Now, I know like what they did to Turing, or no. Yeah, I actually think it was Turing. What they did to him was terrible. But nevertheless, it goes back very, very far. It doesn't seem to be an effect of modernity. But gender-affirming surgery could only have existed. I mean, you do have ritual castration and so on in history. Like you've got like eunuchs and castrati, for instance, and like a lot of cult practices. But it's only with complex abdominal surgery, sterilization techniques, advancements in antibiotics, anesthesia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it does seem to be an epiphenomenon of modern surgical practice. And this whole idea is like, wow, I mean, but how do we get to this point where we're committing unnecessary surgery for profit? Well, yeah, guess what? You've been doing it forever. It's called circumcision. Now, I'm not going to go into the religious aspect of it. We're just going to talk about secular, supposedly healthy circumcision. Okay, so it is actually insane to me. So when you talk about consent, so it's a baby. They can't speak for themselves. If you get a kid, maybe they're 4 years old, and you ask them, hey, would you like to have your genitals mutilated, anesthetized? If they actually understood what that is, the minute they can speak, they would say, no. I mean, I didn't even want to get immunized when I was a child. So so the consent is totally gone. This idea of it being like healthier and preventing STDs and so on. Well, you have to understand that like medical procedures involve informed consent, which involves you actually looking at the data on efficacy. Now, Most of the time, parents are just sort of told that it's, I mean, I've heard a lot of different stories because the guys that actually admit that it really fucked with them, tell you that it really does. So, and then they ask their parents what it was, and sometimes it was just like, oh no, it's just a procedural thing. Like, you know, we do the clotting factor thing. We just, you know, iodine in the eyes or whatever. It's just very standard operating procedure. You whisk your kid away, just get it done, and it's fine. No big deal. Sometimes they ask. Sometimes it costs money. It's just. But it's just sold as this thing. It's not like they're giving you like a cost-benefit analysis, right? I mean, I think I was born in a military hospital, and I just think they didn't have the budget for it. But to be serious about this, though, so John Money and the Reimer case. So that was like the first successful. I mean, the fella took his own life, right? Successful gender reassignment surgery, and that started off as a botched circumcision. And the science community was elated because identical twins, and one lost their genitals to a botched circumcision and the other one didn't. So you've got a control in the experiment. So it's incredibly Mengele-esque, and that's what started. That's what started a lot of the reassignment surgery, a lot of the affirmation surgery. Now, in fairness, I think that some of it was just an experiment to see if you could improve the quality of life for someone that lost it early in their life, rather than doing so later in life, or to affirm a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which, you know, traditionally has not existed until the modern surgical apparatus came around. And you know, so we accept circumcision. We absolutely accept elective medical procedures. So it's like the original sin is already there. Like, there is nothing new under the sun, as I'm very fond of saying. This all starts somewhere. It's the same thing with COVID. Like, so one of the reasons that people don't want to be anti-circumcision outside of the religious tradition of it is because imagine that somebody tells you that you've mutilated your kid because you were approached at a vulnerable time and you flinched, okay? No one, and this is right from the horse's mouth, no one wants to admit that they're mutilated, right? No one wants to admit that they did this to their child. It's just, psychologically, it's too much. So when it comes to COVID, when it starts coming out that the shots might not be that good for you, the defensiveness and the coping that came from that, this is exactly the etiology. This is exactly the pathology that causes this to happen. People double down when they think that they've either fucked themselves up or their children. Okay? Because, like, believe it or not, despite what I may say sometimes, people actually do feel guilty about harming their children. And, you know, it also does, it leads to, I mean, both COVID and circumcision, and I mean, you know, removing people's tonsils before they have a chance to get infected, for instance. I mean, that's actually, I managed to keep my tonsils, even though it was recommended they be taken out almost like the first bout of tonsillitis already pressured me to take them out. Not going to happen. I'm keeping everything until I absolutely can't, because, you know, it's your first line of immune defense. It's insane to me, and this is not medical advice, nor is anything that I'm saying here, but it's insane to me that they would remove that just because, you know, people used to routinely get their tonsils taken out. It was just like a rite of passage, almost like wisdom teeth. Actually, no, I will say my wisdom teeth were taken out. They were deeply, deeply impacted. But the idea being, it's just you're making people less trustworthy of the medical system. And, you know, going back to being in the natural health world, so I actually know somebody that died of HIV. And that was because he believed that AIDS was caused by the antiretroviral medications themselves. And he believed that all the way until he died of a seemingly unrelated case of pneumocystic pneumonia, which is crazy. I think it's the same thing that killed basically every AIDS victim. I know of at least 2 to 3 people that are not taking the antiretroviral medication because, again, it's associated with Fauci. I think one of them was a longtime AZT denier. I think actually I'm not really knowledgeable on the actual medications themselves. I think AZT is like a first generation one. But the point is that it's associated with the early epidemic. But anyway, so one fellow was before the COVID. And you see, the issue with this is that because there's a long, I would say, gestation period, you can catch it and then get the symptoms 10 years later. Of course, you believe that you're healthy the whole time, but we're just sort of waiting until these people check out. And it's really tragic. And it's not helped in part to the medical system and the government making medical science itself considerably less critical, or considerably less credible. It's a terrifying disease. And actually, speaking of that thing about like people just pretending that Liberace was actually straight, there are actually still people that think or say that Freddie Mercury, it was the drugs that got him. It was intravenous needles. I know that one of the Fogarty brothers actually died, got it from a blood transfusion. And, something I'm thinking about too, like when we're talking about gender of the spectrum, homosexuality, or whatever, I'm thinking about the literature in schools. And there's a lot of things going on with that one. I mean, I read some pretty explicit stuff when I was a kid. And, I when I was thinking about when I was in sex ed in school, I remember when I was like 15, 16, you see, one of the things that I really loved about my parents is they never spoke down to me. Like ever since I was a little kid, I was spoken to as an adult. Vocabulary, subject matter doesn't matter. They just decided that. I don't know why. I mean, I remember my mother, she absolutely obliterated an IQ test. Like shocking. And not like, and I knew that she was a smart woman, but like this was shocking to me. And if we speak about the way that women were subjugated back in the day, and the sort of necessity of a rational feminism is that despite being gifted, she was told things like, yeah, you can be a hairdresser. And then it wasn't until she was in the military where they actually pointed out the aptitude. But when she took this IQ test that was like properly administered, I remember what she told me was that like, oh, I'm just good at puzzles. And I'm just like, no, you're just really, really smart. And then I was thinking, it's just like, there's this kind of like the Usual Suspects thing where I'm just thinking about my memories of her. And it's just like, well, wait a minute. She would read books. Like I remember she's like Stephen King's It. She's like, oh, what a piece of shit that was. It took me like a week to read it or whatever. Like, all 1,200 pages of it. Just she's reading like massive amounts of books, never got a gossip mag in her life. It was always, puzzle books, like all these, and, puzzle games and just sort of like cerebral things. I don't know if Sudoku ever made it in there, but again, so if she came about in the time that I did, she probably would have been immediately just like taken out of the regular school system and put somewhere insane. Some kind of advanced placement. There's a quota to meet for technical or science, and who the hell knows what would have happened. So there's two things that may have annihilated me entirely. So there you go. And then, so with the school literature, so they didn't talk down to me. But I got this book, and I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, it was like a book about sex and development and adulthood and all this stuff, but it's everything, but it was written like a technical manual. So there's a whole section of like male pattern baldness. Like I knew the Norwood scale, and then, how to tell if a woman is ovulating. And I remember like for the rest of the week, I was just like pushing the tip of my nose. And I mean, there was like technical descriptions of like sodomy and its practice, and the efficacy of barrier methods, and just like insane amounts of the entire arc of pregnancy and all of the hormonal changes and luteal phase and all this, like just very, very technical stuff. And I just read the whole thing. Now, despite so I had a book that described fellatio, for instance, because I think that's one of the things that they're really crazy about in Alberta schools. And it's not like I was just reading about the practice, like I read a lot about murder. I saw a lot of murder. It didn't make me any, but like there was actually like very graphic descriptions like homosexual acts in said book. But it's not like I was hypnotized by the very act of knowing about and reading a description of the act. I just read it and was like, oh, gross. Even I remember seeing like sort of the those kind of like UN airdropped pictographs of the various sex acts, and that was not something that just caused me to hypnotically absorb it. I just had awareness of it, and there we went. Nothing really bad happened. So I just don't see what this sexual mimetic contagion, what makes it so harmful. I would just say, what is the compromise here? It's just like your school is full of people that want to show this to you for some reason. It's all right to just ignore it because it's everywhere. It exists. And that's it. So it's just, the problem is, of course, when you democratize school, we're not talking about objective morality. We're talking about the morality of the populace, which is capricious, which can change. So the best that you can, just isolate yourself and your children from democracy and have it more towards justice and human rights. There is a combination of nature and nurture. And, it's one of those things where I never think I'd never believe it's a choice because, like, actually speaking to homosexuals of all types, I'm just thinking, yeah, there's no way that this is just like a choice. There's no way that this is just something that they decided to do for attention. That's absolutely insane. And nor do I think that conversion therapy would do a lick of difference. And indeed, I mean, the conversion therapy camps, it is sort of its own little fire island. I hear it told. But anyway, it's just, like, first of all, no one's going to a library. Second of all, I mean, you've got this little black square of hardcore pornography in your wallet, in your front pocket at all times. I was happy that my parents were attentive enough to not give me unfettered broadband internet access. I watched a lot of foreign films, I'll say that much. But the point is that that's not what's going to do it. And I think that this is a displacement ritual in the sense that, so people obviously cannot afford to have a parent in the home educating their children the way that they want to. And people don't know what to do about it. It's obviously like an inflationary thing where, yes, of course, both parents have to work. It's a necessity. It's just not worth it. And people really can't negotiate what the actual problem is. The education doesn't really mean anything any longer to begin with. I mean, it's just, I took my good enough diploma and it caused me no professional hurdles whatsoever. And I remember after I got the test done, an hour and a half of my life saved me, I don't even know, dozens and maybe hundreds of hours of classroom instruction, and there was no consequences to it whatsoever. Post-secondary, they don't really seem to care. They really don't. Like, you're not going to Harvard. You're not, like, the idea of even going to an Ivy League school, like, because that's what everybody was so insane about, like, oh, you got to go to school, because you have to get math 30 and something 30, and if you don't, you're going to not go to the best school. You can't go to McGill, and you can't become an economist, and you can't make. I mean, I don't know. I actually know a McGill-educated economist, and his apartment is about as nice as mine. So, I win. No. Which brings me to imposter syndrome. I have this memory of, I thought, you know what? I'm an adult man. I am going to an outdoor patio, and I'm going to drink a beer. And I was on Stephen Avenue, and I believe the Telus building was in view. Yeah, likely Stephen Avenue. But so I was sitting alone, and there's this another guy sitting alone, and I began talking to him, and it was interesting because, like, we were entire strangers to one another, and for whatever reason, he just started confessing to me that he made a lot of money. I don't know what particular industry he was in. He was a little sketchy on that, but he was like six figures And he just tells me, it's just like, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I technically have the credentials, but like nothing has prepared me for what I actually do on a day to day. So I think that, I mean, if I had to tell somebody, it's just like, if you live in Alberta, you just need to become an engineer, and that's it. Like, there's no other career. There's like doctor and engineer. Engineer is just kind of like the general, like, you're a smart guy kind of degree. And I've met people that do all sorts of crazy stuff, and they're just, yeah, I'm an engineer. It's just like, really? But anyway, so I think he was an engineer that was put into some kind of really high-end management position. And yeah, he just confessed to me, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is really interesting because it's, well, first I had this axiom that is, fake it until you make it, or only the fake will make it. So what that means is like, your imposter syndrome is actually a indication that you are moral and you actually have some duty to your fellow man to make sure that you are doing the right thing. And if you feel like this, like, shame is good if you've done something wrong. Shame is the instinct that tells you, correct it, do something about it. But if you just feel like this low background radiation of shame all the time that seems to defy any kind of natural indication that you should be ashamed, that would just be, in my opinion, my amateur opinion, a traumatic response. Because, think about the ways, like, think about everybody. Like, we all tend to have the same kind of experiences. And if we're in a position of authority where we're looked to and we haven't lied our way there and it's just done in performance, there's a pretty good chance that, yeah, you're fine with it. You're fine. I mean, I'm thinking about, like, when I had friends where their parents were like really, really restrictive about their romantic entanglements. I mean, God, I had one friend that I've always hated house coats, because I remember her dad, I don't know if he was employed or what the hell he did, but he was always like mean mugging you, and he was walking around the house, and her mom wore just a little too much makeup, and he was very, very forbidding about male attention in the household. And I remember she ended up pregnant at like 17, and then she just left the house. Like, that was her way to get away, because you can't deny a pregnancy that's kept. Like, that is sort of your get out of jail free card. And then it's just like, yeah, great job. So you just, because, you stunt the ability for her to have like healthy male interactions and actually learn her way around it. And then, well, there you go, teen pregnancy. I hope you're happy. And like, whenever somebody tells you to be cautious or that what you're doing is immoral, I mean, well, look what they've done in their lives. So I found it very ironic when I talk to these sort of really restrictive Christian family friends, and it's like the incredibly restricted around like dating and chaperones and just like cautions and just, like, nobody's good enough. And it's just like, maybe it's not right. Like, you're only 28 years old. Like, have you really thought this through? And meeting so many, like, I think I've actually met like women that remain virgins until they're 35 and are just like completely stunted. And I'm just thinking like, okay, well, then you talk to their parents, and it's like, oh, well, so how did you two meet? It's just like, oh, we met at 18 at a barn dance. We met at like a school social. I don't know. There's like a class bowling trip or something, and then we just decided to go with it. And when you actually think about people that are, like talk to people that have been married for 60 years or something like that, it's always just like, yeah, I saw her, I thought she was cute, and then I talked to her, and then we just progressed from there. Like, sort of a corollary to my criticism of dating websites. It's like, no, I was told this very early on. Like, listen, like, I know that you think that there's like, it's very good that you have an ear and an eye for simpatico and a mind for simpatico and the matching of values and so on. But like, this is all relatively superficial to begin with. Like, there's a charge, she's cute, and then you see what happens. There is no handshaking of architectures behind the scene that make you allowed to be in a relationship. So again, when somebody gives you a moral impunction, a moral system, just like, one, did they follow the morals? 2, can they show you? a successful relationship based upon their recommendations that is sustained and both people can be confirmed to be happy. So that's the thing. It's just like with these structures and imposter syndrome and your workplace and even your government, just when somebody gives you rules, show me where they work. Show me if you follow them. Are you a fat diet instructor? You know what I mean? Like, are you a fitness instructor that cannot lift his own weight? Like, we all know it. We've all seen it. And then I think, like, so the married people that I know, you know, like what sustains them across crises? Because there's obviously a lot of awful things that happen to people when they're in relationships and when they're married. And, you know, talking to married people, because I have not had the pleasure. Well, one thing that sticks out to me is that, so I think that the miscarriage rate is 30%, which is why they tell you to wait like 12 weeks or something. And hearing people talk about it, it's something that you can't prepare yourself for. Like, I mean, we always talk about, like, you know, childbirth and all that, but like losing a child before it even begins, so to speak, and how you can't prepare for that. And in the specific conversations that I've had, I mean, it is a lot like, I mean, I lost 2 cats when I was a kid. So one was just eaten by coyotes. And I was over it in like a minute and a half because, you know, I had seen him devour mice, and I think he would always leave their livers in the lawn. And then I had another cat that got shot with a pellet gun in my neighborhood. And this took me a while to get over because this got really fucked up. So I remember that my mom went around the neighborhood and asked the neighbors, hey, have you seen anybody shooting cats with a pellet gun? And I remember that, one of the neighbors complained and said, like, you shouldn't let your cat run around the neighborhood. And so it was the combination of this unbelievable cruelty, both shooting a cat, like, it's just an outdoor cat. Like, it's not a menace. Like, he didn't even dig up garden beds, and he could really dig up because he had six toes. But he didn't dig up garden beds. Killed pests. I don't really see what the problem was, but both the malice of that, but also the woman, like, just, that's what you would say to a woman that's just trying to find out. Because, you know, like, serial killers, one of the things is torturing or killing animals early on. If there's somebody killing pets in your neighborhood, you'd really want to know about that. And the worst part is that, like, this woman didn't have a pellet gun or anything like that, because I think a constable ended up talking to her. Like, there was no chance that she was the perpetrator or aiding and abetting said perpetrator. But it took me, you know, weeks to get over that as a kid, because I'm like, not only is my cat dead, but like the malice of my neighbors. And so when I think about miscarriage, I know it's an odd thing to match, but it's just, you know, everybody did the best they could and nature took its course. And, you know, there's something that brings these people together, because there was very high hopes and then completely dashed in an instant, and not a particularly pleasant instant either. Like, you know, they just give you a pamphlet, really. Like, there's not a lot of reverence, and it's and I suppose, like, you know, the modern sort of abortion complex sort of demands that they don't make that reverent. They don't treat it like you've lost a person, and so they sort of have to be very clinical about it, much to the chagrin of and trauma of these people who just want to, like, honor what happened. But what I'm thinking about, like, what breaks couples apart, and, you know, things like money and, I don't know, division of chores, and people cheating, obviously. And those things, like, there's agency attached to them. So it's just like you either change or you drift apart. Whereas something like this, no one is really to blame. You just get through it together, and that strengthens the bond. And it seems that facing actual and inevitable life things together probably puts more of a perspective on the household chores and the money and everything. I mean, statistically, it's actually said that you really shouldn't live with somebody for a while before you get married, because that actually increases the rate of you developing resentment before you actually split up. So it seems like there's like a huge leap of faith. Like, just that's it, get married. Like, you date for a couple of months, then boom, marriage. Figure it out. And that seems to be the thing that causes the most successful long-term marriages. I find that very interesting. But here we are with this like imposter syndrome. Like, if you just like the first time that you live together with somebody is, 6 months after you've met them, and you're maintaining separate residences and all that. I mean, the amount of the amount of fear of incompatibility must be off the charts for that. But nevertheless, I mean, I do have friends that got married after living together for a long time. But this one couple is just the statistically anomalous. So I'll say that much. And in professional realms too, like, I mean, I think about lawyers where you're a whiz kid and you're smart as hell, and then you get into a huge firm and you're doing great, and then you decide, I can practice on my own. And it's sort of it's a well-known thing where so you're in your own place, and you got like a paralegal, and then it's like, oh, I have to find clients. Oh, I don't have a team of paralegals doing my research anymore. Oh, I don't have a legal secretary to handle all my emails. I don't have a legal secretary to handle all the crazy people that walk in and just say, I got in a car accident 6 years ago. What can you do for me? I don't really have money. I have stock in Sears Roebuck. Like, it's just crazy stuff like that. You're sitting on the shoulders of giants, and there's very surprising things where you think that you're like this god of law, or your practice in general. I mean, think about an internist that just suddenly gets a small town practice. You don't really recognize that it's actually a lot more serious than you were thinking. And so the antidote to this imposter syndrome, and I suppose imposter syndrome is the ultimate fear. Like, that is the fear beneath the fear in your subconscious. It's just like you have all these aspirations and you have all these beautiful things that you want to do in your life, but you've got limited time, and you know yourself, and you waste time, and the same ability that allows you to develop these skills, and the same sort of fire in your belly that causes you to become approaching something like a perfectionist. Like, you have this duty to others around you to make sure that you know what you're doing before you have them entrust you. And that's the same for everything. It's yourself, it's your children, it's your relationships. It is the polis that extends all the way out, as I'm very fond of telling you. And what is the solution to that? Well, I mean, that does seem to be like, fake it till you make it. I had this idea of counterfeit till you can't quit. So I don't really know how to end this one. I guess I just answered the question that I started off with, when are we finally going to have fun? And the best I can say is soon.